Welcome to another episode of People Talks. I'm your host, Naveed Salim from Engage Rocket, the fastest growing people analytics tech company in Southeast Asia. This series, we explore different aspects of how companies and leaders are navigating through the current COVID-19 situation to extract insights and practices from those at the top of their field. Over the past month, we've all been undergoing the largest work from home experiment ever. Already, it's having huge implications on how we think about remote working, the future of the office space, and communications technology. Today, it's my great pleasure to have with us Carl Ng, Chief Operating Officer at Lifetrack Medical, to share more about that experience. Hi, Carl, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Naveed, and thank you for having me here.
My pleasure. So for us, Carl, who've been living under a rock, please can you tell us a little bit more about Lifetrack Medical?
Sure. So I'll start with the problem that Lifetrack was founded to solve. And that problem is 2/3 of the world, which is about 5 billion people, don't have access to medical imaging. And that's an issue because medicine is becoming imaging first. And so when I say imaging, I'm talking about X-rays or CTs or ultrasounds. So if you think about any time you've been sick over the last several years, it probably required some form of imaging, whether you had a sprained ankle and you need to take an X-ray. In my case, unfortunately, my mother passed away from cancer, so we had to do a lot of PET CTs, Alzheimer's. You need to do an MRI and so on and so forth. So it's a huge component of modern medicine, and it's a big problem that 5 billion people around the world don't have access to this basic diagnostic tool. And how Lifetrack addresses that, and I won't go into too much detail because I think it'll get a little too medical for your audience. But essentially, what we're doing is we're replacing legacy software with our kind of cutting edge solution. And what we're with that solution, we enable the doctors, which are the radiologists, to reach more patients, diagnose them more effectively and efficiently, and increase the overall diagnostic capacity of the system. And as part of that, we're big believers in working from home. Part of the problem we're trying to solve is that legacy software for radiologists requires them to be physically at the hospital or the clinic. And so you go to places around the region like Manila or Jakarta, and you're stuck in 2 hours of traffic traveling from hospital to hospital. And that's simply not tenable. And so in this new world of COVID, unfortunately, it's been actually a good demonstration for our approach of making work distributed and allowing radiologists to be remotely present in multiple facilities at the same time.
Very interesting, and I have to say, quite a noble cause there, trying to ease this whole process, right? Let me ask. So, what are some of the sort of countries that appear to be successful with their initial attempts to flatten the curve? Are you optimistic that we will be back to business as usual soon?
I think if you look, around the world, there's definitely some bright spots. South Korea is already, my friends there are sharing photos on Instagram of being out in cafes and restaurants and doing things that we here in Southeast Asia can only dream of at the moment. Obviously, Germany is starting to go back to work as well. I think we are still learning more about this virus, unfortunately, and the United States remains the epicenter, and because of the issues with their governance model, we're seeing a very large experiment on a state-by-state opening and what that's going to look like. But here in Southeast Asia, we are, I think, at the end of the beginning, if I can say that. So most of the countries in the region are approaching the end of their lockdowns. Certain countries like Malaysia have done better than others. Even in Singapore, which unfortunately ignored the situation with its migrant workers. I think it sounds like they're starting to get a handle on it, and the containment measures are having an impact. So I think that's one aspect, and I think the second aspect really is understanding how many of us have actually been exposed to this virus, right? Because I think there's an emerging body of research that says that most of us were actually exposed and asymptomatic and maybe hopefully have built up some resistance to it. Getting to that understanding, whether not relying on the current testing, but more on the serology test, which is the antibody test, will help us get back to work quicker. Whether or not that flattening the curve basically is just buying us time so that the hospitals aren't overwhelmed, and that time hopefully is being used by governments to put in place more healthcare infrastructure, but also to figure out how to get back parts of society into a more normal framework without sacrificing people's health, and understanding who's actually been affected and whether they were actually symptomatic or not is a big part of that. Because if most people are healthy and get this and don't get sick at all, then that should figure into kind of a broader policy into how we mitigate risks, because I don't think this is going away. In fact, let me rephrase. I don't think it's going. I'm sure it's not going to go away until we have a vaccine or a treatment. So it's going to stay with us. It may recur, and understanding who is actually going to be most affected if it does recur versus people who are like at very low risk is going to have to be a key element.
Right. Okay. So moving on, we understand that Lifetrack has launched a free initiative recently. Can you share a little bit more about that and how you hope this will actually impact the pandemic?
So we started with obviously when COVID started emerging, we as a health tech company, we were paying a lot of attention. And one of the things that we saw, at least from the initial response in China where this started, was they were using a lot of imaging. So actually in China, they would, as part of the screening for COVID symptoms, most people would get a chest CT on top of being assessed for other symptoms like fever and cough. And based on the chest CT and other symptoms, you could be put into what they call a fever clinic, and quarantined and isolated and not allowed to return home. So as the disease spread around the world, unfortunately, different countries have adopted different types of frameworks. I don't think there's been one agreed upon standard. So medical imaging has been kind of part of that. So in the UK, for example, the national health system is doing x-rays to triage and do what they call risk stratification for patients, because one of the weird things about this disease is that you could be completely asymptomatic, but you take an x-ray or CT and it shows that you have pneumonia in your lungs. So before you start showing symptoms, it's already attacking your lungs. And in other parts of the world, it hasn't been adopted yet by the medical establishment. And so what we said was, if there are, particularly in low resource environments, such as, you're looking at where we operate in Southeast Asia, countries like the Philippines and Indonesia have very fragmented healthcare systems, and most of the resources are concentrated in Manila and Jakarta, so that if you're in an outlying island, you may not get the test results of the molecular swabbing for another 6 to 7 days. So what we did was we started partnering with public health authorities to offer our technology for free, so that they could do triaging using CT scans or X-rays, and determine kind of the risk level of a patient. And if there were some indications on the chest scan that maybe this patient might have COVID, let's not send them home. Let's isolate them first. Let's prioritize them for the molecular testing, and then we can make a decision off the molecular test once that's confirmed or that they have COVID or not. So we've expanded the program since then, and we're now talking to a lot more actually private healthcare providers as well, who are as well as the public hospitals, obviously, who are also dealing with the new normal of remote work and contingency planning for business continuity. So we've actually just signed a second hospital, which is a private hospital, but is functioning as part of the healthcare response to COVID in another island in the Philippines. The first one was a provincial healthcare authority, which is in the central Philippines. If your viewers are familiar with Boracay, which I think is it's a famous beach in the Philippines. Yep. It's basically the province beside Boracay. and that was our first public healthcare authority. So they're using our software. The radiologist that works in that hospital is actually based on another island, couldn't travel to the island where that hospital was because of the lockdown, and so now they're able to access the CTs remotely.
Wow, that's good to hear. And I understand there has been some success in terms of you have managed to identify some of the patients who might have potentially had COVID already.
Yes. So we at the moment we're still waiting for the results of the PCR tests. So we can't confirm it yet. Hopefully they're not, which I think would be better for everyone. But I think certainly it's helped play a part in identifying risks with non-symptomatic individuals, so that if they do end up having COVID, they're not just being sent home and infecting their families first.
Okay, very good to hear. Very good to hear. So let's move on a little bit to your organization. And of course, being a medical company, you do have people on the front line. So what are some of the things your line managers are doing to support these employees who are at the front line?
So it's an interesting question, because before, I think it was the beginning of March, we started having discussions on whether we should still be sending the sales team to the hospitals to meet with doctors there, knowing that the infection was starting to trend upwards. So what we decided at that time was, it's not fair to ask them to risk themselves and then tell them not to come to the office, and because we can infect everyone. So what we said was, okay, don't go to the hospitals anymore. If you're going to meet with doctors, because they are decision makers that they need to be meeting, for example, meet them outside of the hospital, maybe in an adjacent cafe. Make sure you wear a mask. Practice hygiene, wash your hands and everything, and take proper steps. Obviously since then we've just done completely remote work arrangements for everyone, because of partly driven by government policy around the lockdown. And so what we're doing now is we've equipped everyone with the ability to work from home. So not at the start, not everyone had laptops. A lot of the developers had desktops because they needed more power. So we've allowed them to take the equipment home. In some cases, we've arranged for the delivery of equipment to them, because the lockdown was pretty abrupt, and so we weren't able to equip everyone. So we've sent everyone there with the system they need to keep working seamlessly from home. On kind of the people side, we've looked at government policies to assist those who are not able to work. So we do have some hourly staff, mostly doing the administrative task in the office, and obviously there's no office now, so we managed to secure assistance for them from the relevant government agencies, and we're still continuing to pay them a portion of their salary even if they're not able to work. And then I think the third thing is, it's been nice to see that there's been initiative from the team itself to kind of keep the culture and the spirit in the team going. So I think quite organically, they've started arranging kind of like a virtual water cooler coffee chat sessions in the morning, where I think they just get on for 50 minutes, and they could all be talking, or some of them could be working, but it's just kind of like replicating office chatter when you're all in the same office. And I think they share their tips, such as the best noise canceling software that's free that you can download, Zoom backgrounds that you can use, all these kinds of things, right? So it's not just the leadership team or management, but also team members themselves who are stepping up and helping.
That's very good to hear, and likewise, I haven't read this much about things like technology in a long time, but it's very important that we have to adopt and be able to pivot right during this sort of period. So let me ask. I mean, communication is obviously something that's very important, right? And being remote, that changes how we communicate. Are there any processes or practices that Lifetrack users to ensure that communications are cascaded well and that employees are aligned with the leadership ultimately?
So I have not sat in this many video meetings since it started, and there's when you're all working remotely. I think one of the things we realized is conversations that you could have had where you just kind of walk over to someone's room and just kind of very quickly ask them. It's much harder to do. So we've had to structure a regular cadence of meetings with the remote team members, which before were much more ad hoc, where you're in the same office, so you don't really need to have kind of weekly catch up. So I think that's one thing we've done, and we've done it across. So we have people working in Manila, in Singapore, in Bangalore, and in the US. So it's also important to get team members outside the region involved. So we've set up kind of bi-weekly functional leadership meetings for customer success and for growth, for marketing, which involve colleagues from around the world, and that just helps keep the flow of communication going between tech and commercial teams. That's one thing. Second, because we need to find an effective way of just cascading updates and communications, we actually started sending out kind of a monthly employee newsletter, which has all of the kind of updates that normally would just get shared organically within the teams, which is also I think that's actually been kind of a good approach for us to cascade communication, such as latest publicity, latest updates on the company, the Engage Rocket survey that we're running was through the newsletter, and it's a way to kind of keep everyone up to date. And as part of that newsletter, I've had to I call it Carl's COVID corner. So it's alliteration, but a little alliteration to make it funny, but just kind of updates and bright spots from the company. I think a lot of people are worried, and at the early part of this situation, I myself was feeling, anxious, wasn't sleeping well, and part of I think leading a team or a company at this time is just reassuring your team members, right? And we're in a fortunate position where we secured our Series A last year, so we're provisioned for this period. So we're not, we haven't let go of anyone. We have scaled back some hours and asked for reduction in some people's pay, but otherwise we're continuing to hire. And so it's important to just reassure the team that the company's not about to go under simply because of the lockdown. And in fact, now that certain economies or countries are starting to recover, we've started seeing an uptick in business again. So we signed our first customer in Australia last week. That was supposed to happen in February, got delayed because of their COVID response. The guy came back and said, "Hey, looks like we're things have settled down. Actually, we do have need of your solution now," and it moved a lot faster, after that. So sharing those types of updates, because not everyone in the company may hear about it if they're not directly working on it, is important to keep up morale and let them see that there is an end to this, and at least we see in other countries, and that the company will be well positioned to when that happens.
Right. So picking up on that term you use, it's good for morale. So it seems like you are doing a couple of things to understand, how your talent is thinking and feeling in this uncertain time. How does that actually guide your management decision making?
So we're trying to make sure that everyone is able to stay kind of effective, and on top of that, I think we also have a duty of care for employees. For example, we do have some, unfortunately, some people who've gone through some medical conditions during this period. We've offered them, assistance on top of their regular salary. So, we've had to examine, what does a company advance look like? Wasn't something that we did before this, but given the situation, it's something that we can do for employees. Um, uh, that's one thing. I think second is we're still a very small company. I think we're less than 40 people right now. So still small enough where our people and talent team can kind of just informally check in on people and identify any potential challenges people are facing and kind of respond quickly. And obviously, there's also the team leaders themselves who are able to escalate things if they're hearing from their team members about that. As I mentioned, we are running surveys, and we're waiting for the results of those. It'd be interesting to see how we can use that to work better, because one of the things we all need to realize, which I think most people know already, but it's not just going to be everyone just goes back to working the way things were. I'm based right now in the Philippines, so I'm in one of our main offices, which is in Manila, and we're not expecting everyone to go back to work, or not go back to work, but go back to the office on after May 15, which is when the official kind of what they call the enhanced community quarantine ends, right? So there's still the latest guidelines from the Department of Labor here has been that they want companies to have only part of the workforce in the offices, that they should practice social distancing, everyone needs to wear masks. So we're still going to be looking at a significant part of the team working remotely at any given time. And so we continue to look at ways where we can kind of adjust to that.
Okay. Now, picking up on something you mentioned earlier, I understand that Lifetrack is continuing with hiring despite having most of your workforce working from home. Very positive to hear that. Can you actually elaborate on how you're managing this process?
So we were in the middle of doing a hiring push for Q1 and Q2, and obviously that got a little bit disrupted by COVID. So I think in the early weeks we did say, let's pause a few of these conversations first and see how things evolve, and then as I think as things settled down, we had more bandwidth. We actually said, well, now is actually a good time to see where talent is, and where we need additional team members to address some really important projects, especially on the technical side, but also on the commercial side as well. We're continuing to make hires. So there's been some opportunities. Unfortunately, as some companies have laid people off, there's a lot of talented people out there that are available and looking for work. And we see no reason why we shouldn't give them an opportunity to do something productive with their skills over here in Lifetrack. So we also it was actually at the very beginning of the lockdown, we had 2 employees that were going to join. So one of them has been working remotely the whole time. We did her onboarding remotely the whole time, so I still haven't met her in person. And that's actually what's necessitated doing more regular kind of team meetings to kind of get her deeper into or kind of more integrated into the existing kind of cadence of when you have people who've been working together for a while and you're working remotely, and then I think you need to invest more in getting them set up. Another person who's kind of managed to get some of the onboarding done in person, and then had to kind of quickly adjust to working from home. But most of the people he's supervising were already working from home to begin with. So that's been easier transition. And actually, he went on paternity leave in the middle of the lockdown too, because his wife gave birth. So it's been I think pretty seamless, and I think credit to our team, where I think a lot of people have stepped up and just really tried to make sure that team members are equipped to work effectively even during this period. And we have extended offers during. Maybe I'll end by saying we've extended offers during the lockdown. We've had, unfortunately, the offers we've extended. A lot of them are for technical hires, and we can do some of the onboarding remotely. But our VP of engineering has said that since we're approaching the end of the lockdown period, um, we set the contracts to start when they're officially able to go to the office in person. So we put that flexibility into some of the agreements.
Yeah, it's quite unprecedented times, right? Where your first day of work is not at work; it's at home.
Yes,
But you are
and
at
you're and we for this person, we unfortunately we don't have we didn't manage to get the laptops delivered before the lockdown, and so there's no deliveries of equipment at this point. So they're
home.
working off the personal laptop.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you also shared with me that Lifetrack has taken this opportunity to work on what you call organizational debt.
Yeah.
Um, please, can you share with us what this means and how you think this is actually going to benefit your organization?
So this is something that I've been thinking about for a while, because you look at technology and engineering teams, and they have what's called technical debt, which I think most of your audience should be familiar with, which is basically, here's the backlog of features and requests and things that we need to work on, which we haven't addressed yet. In a similar way, there's organizational debt. It's also a backlog of things and challenges and processes, for teams, for companies, as especially for a company like ours, where we've gone from, I think that we had less than, maybe probably 15 employees this time last year, and we've kind of doubled in about a year with people based around the world. There's been an essential element, which has been unaddressed, of kind of building new processes and procedures in place, which also incorporate things we've learned along the way as we scale the company up. So this is everything from what are the handoffs for from making a proposal all the way to doing a full deployment to the customer. How does that work when you have a much bigger team and you have a remote team, and you're also working with larger customers that require more documentation? So what's the kind of the Bible for that? Your commercial playbook, right? So just so it's seamless from a internal point of view, but also from a customer experience point of view. How do we offer that experience? All the way to how are we doing things like performance reviews? How are we doing things? Like how we used to do, hiring used to be very informal. So there was no place where we were tracking people's comments. It was basically no written kind of reviews. So we've set up projects on Asana, where we, for every role, where we kind of track, and we've set up stages, and so we can kind of drag and drop people's names as they go through the different stages. And
Wow.
people are supposed to add their comments there, and then it's a good way of tracking how discussion about this person evolves, right? So that part of this organizational debt is also implementing new tools. I mentioned, Asana is one tool I've been experimenting with using more. Dropbox was another thing which we've set up. Given that it's remote work, we're doing a lot more DocuSign, so electronic signatures, and sending in proposals. Salesforce, so that's another thing. We didn't have a CRM, so actually we deployed our CRM in the middle of the pandemic, or of the lockdown, because what else is your growth team going to be doing, since they can't really talk to customers, especially our customers? Obviously, a lot of them were in the early parts of the emergency or the lockdowns, were consumed with their own issues, and it was they're the real frontliners. So we wanted to respect that they were probably overwhelmed, and we didn't want to be actively trying to initiate sales calls or anything of the sort. And so we had to focus internally on, here's a system that we've been talking about for a long time.
Yep.
Let's evaluate. Let's all try it out, and let's make a decision. And so now we have Salesforce as our CRM, and everyone's migrated their data over to Salesforce, and we can now actually use it for management conversations, such as we have the right dashboards and reporting now. And the last thing we want to be doing, I think, at this stage, which will be a big cultural change, is the idea of formal performance reviews, and treading the line between making it overly bureaucratic, but still having a mechanism to capture people who are performing well, and people who aren't. I think is important as we grow larger. When you're 10 or 15 people and you're all in the same room, It's very easy to see who's performing and who's not. As you hit 30 and you're all, people are working, as I said, remotely, but also uh, around the world. People deserve a way of having their work formally evaluated and using that as a means of deciding on promotions and incentives and bonuses, and rewarding people who are performing, right? That's something that we want to invest in. Probably hope to have that set up by the end of the second quarter, and we'll probably do a dry run for the first half of the year and then formally launch it for the end of the year. But these are the kind of things that, because of the way that it's not business as usual, where you're not consumed by the day to day, and there's a lot more free time internally. You can invest in putting in place these types of foundations so that when things go back to business as usual, everyone will be used to using these new tools, these new processes, and running at a much faster rate because of that. And that's the goal, right? We want to be able to run at a much faster rate, and grow much faster, and do it more efficiently, and give people the right tools to do that.
Right. So it's really making this an opportunity to sort of iron out the kinks and sharpen your tools, to sort of secure a strong recovery, which sounds like a very good plan, right? A lot of companies should look into being able to do something like that. So Carl, what do you think will be the long-term impact of this crisis overall?
I think it'll be interesting to see how normal looks like. On one hand, a lot of people are predicting, it's never going to be the same again. But on the other hand, people have a remarkably short-term memory. And you already see, at least, if you look at the news, there's videos of people frolicking on the beaches in the US, right? So I think certainly we will see a very strong economic impact this year. Unfortunately, there will be declines in GDP, and that'll hit some businesses, and budgets will be cut, and spending will be cut, and people will lose their jobs, and that's incredibly unfortunate. But I think in terms of what happens longer term, impacts of these, it does accelerate digital transformation in this part of the world, in particular. I think you're already seeing some of that. But I think it's forced a lot of, especially older, bigger companies who, I'll give you an example. A friend of mine working on e-commerce for one of the biggest retailers in the Philippines was saying we had a 2-year roadmap for e-commerce. Now I have a 3-month roadmap, because we need to be able, malls have been closed for like the last 2-3 months, right? So we have to find a way to like accelerate the implementation of this. And there's that funny meme going around of, who led digital transformation in your company, and it is COVID, right? So older employees who had always resisted using Zoom are now, putting funny backgrounds, and mastering the art of video conferencing. But I think it'll make people more comfortable with using online or digital tools.
Yep.
I do think there's a very strong desire for everyone to kind of just go back to the point where I don't need to be in Zoom calls or video calls the whole day, but I can actually have human face-to-face interaction. So we will go back to that, but there will be more openness to digital tools and the kind of work enabled by that. So remote work, whether that's permanent remote work arrangements for people, whether that's allowing people to work from home on certain days of the week.
Yep.
I think that's something a lot of companies are going to continue to do. In our own industry, a lot of healthcare providers were very, very cautious about, a lot of the more established ones were very, very cautious about adopting our solution, because there were concerns about patient privacy, and just replacing legacy software with kind of ripping that up and imposing a new one. Now that they've realized that we need to have a way for doctors to work remotely, at least these types of doctors, radiologists, because they can, there's a lot more appetite to experiment than I saw before that. So I think certainly it's going to change the way we work, but I don't think it's going to change as much as we think it will. There will be maybe in the next 6-9 months, but people are going to go back and people are going to want to congregate and see each other in person because that's just how humans are built.
Yeah, true. I tend to agree to a certain extent. I'm eager to get back to work and have some human interaction as well.
Yeah.
So just to sort of round up, Carl, what is the one thing you'd suggest leaders of other businesses should do more of, or stop doing for that matter, to support their people better during this time?
I think this is a good forcing function for a lot of leaders to stop micromanaging. Now that you're no longer able to just kind of pop into a room and kind of bug people, this is an opportunity to sharpen your management skills and delegate, and kind of empower. And I think taking it a step further, just really empowering and trusting people. And obviously, trust is a two-way street. So we have had incidents where we've had to send out communications to people who were not online when they're supposed to be online and not responsive. But at the same time, you cannot just be permanently checking your messenger notifications when someone needs you, right? So adjusting to this idea where give people the chance to have kind of protected time to work, and there's going to be time where they're available for you to kind of chat with them formally or informally, or setting up kind of regular weekly meetings where people check in rather than just kind of bugging them every day. I think that's we are as I guess in technology or startups and office workers privileged to be able to work from home in a way that service sector workers and frontliners are not. Empowering people to do that and trusting them to be adults and responsible while being effective at their jobs, I think is one thing that I hope leaders kind of learn the lesson that you can't trust people to work from home if you hire the right people. It might actually end up being more effective. Certainly I've been very, like I said, we've gotten a lot done. Actually, not that we talked to it, right? Like CRM and processes and everything, things that I was actually frankly kind of worried about doing given how busy things are. We've gotten a lot off our plate in terms of objectives that we had for the organization this year.
Okay, so learn to trust your staff and employees, and they're adults and will do their work.
Well, and I think, but the caveat, not the caveat, but provide them the structure where you can where they can thrive in this type of setup.
Right.
And so it's not completely no accountability, but how do you put in place accountability without micromanagement?
Right. So empowering them as well.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Carl, thank you so much. So let me just say once again, that was Carlan, Chief Operating Officer at Lifetrack Medical. I've been your host, Naveed Salim from Engage Rocket, and you've been watching People Talks.